The wind off the mountains carried the smell of winter and death. Caleb Hart stood in the small cemetery behind his ranch house, hat in one hand, the other pressed against the weathered fence post that separated the living world from this plot of frozen ground. The sky above Montana Territory was the color of old iron, heavy with the promise of snow that would come before morning. February 1886, and the earth was still too hard to dig, too cold to accept new burials. He was grateful for that at least. He had buried enough. 3 small headstones stood in a row before him, crude markers he had carved himself because the stonemason in Helena charged too much and asked too many questions. The first bore no name, only a date. March 4th, 1878. His son, born too early, lived 3 hours. The second beside it was only slightly larger. March 6th, 1878. Another son twin to the first who had followed his brother 2 days later. Mary, his first wife, had not survived the week. Her stone was larger, more carefully carved, but the letters were still rough. Mary Catherine Hart, beloved wife, taken too soon. Caleb's jaw clenched as he moved his gaze to the 4th marker set slightly apart from the others. Sarah Elizabeth Hart, it read, and beside her name, a smaller stone. Baby Hart, both dead 3 years this coming April. Childbirth had taken them just as surely as disease had taken Mary and the twins. 4 people, 4 failures, 4 pieces of his soul buried in frozen Montana ground. He should not be here tonight. He should be in the house preparing for what was coming tomorrow. The stagecoach from Helena would arrive at noon, and with it, the woman he had contracted through the matrimonial agency, a practical arrangement, they had called it. A mail-order bride to help manage the ranch, to cook and clean and mend, to share the burden of survival in this unforgiving territory. Nothing more. He had been very clear in his letter. No romance, no promises beyond room and board and respect. He was not a man built for love anymore. Love was a luxury for people who had not learned its cost. But standing here in the gathering dusk with the wind howling through the pines and the first snowflakes beginning to fall, Caleb could not shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. Men who had buried 4 people had no business inviting a 5th into their lives. The ranch needed help, yes, but was that reason enough to risk another loss? Was loneliness justification for this reckless gamble? He turned away from the graves and walked back toward the house, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The ranch sprawled before him in the fading light, 600 acres of snow-covered land hemmed in by mountains on 3 sides. The barn loomed dark against the white expanse. The stable and chicken coop and scatter of outbuildings looked small and vulnerable beneath the vast Montana sky. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, barely visible in the growing storm. It was not much. Compared to the grand estates back east, it was nothing. But it was his. Built with his own hands after Mary died, expanded after he married Sarah. Maintained alone for the 3 years since her death. Every board, every nail, every fence post represented survival. Hard won and harder kept. Tomorrow that survival would include another person, a stranger who would sleep under his roof, eat at his table, work beside him in the endless struggle against weather and isolation, and the slow grinding poverty that killed more ranchers than any drought or disease. He tried to imagine her. The agency had sent a photograph, but it had been too faded to make out features clearly. A woman in a dark dress standing very straight, her face a pale oval. Miss Eleanor Whitlock, age 28, the letter had said. Experienced in household management, seeking a fresh start in the territories, available immediately. The description had been clinical spare, which suited Caleb fine. He was not looking for beauty or refinement. He was looking for someone who could survive a Montana winter and not break under the weight of isolation. Someone practical. Someone plain. Someone who would not ask questions about the graves behind the house, or the silence that filled the rooms, or the way he sometimes woke in the night with a scream caught in his throat. Inside the house, he built up the fire and checked his preparations. Clean linens on the spare room bed, firewood stacked by the door, pantry stocked with basic supplies. Everything ready for her arrival. He sat at the kitchen table and forced himself to eat a simple meal of bread and dried meat, though his stomach was tight with apprehension. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and full of dreams he could not remember come morning. The Helena depot was crowded with the usual Thursday commerce when Caleb arrived at 11:30 the next day. Ranch hands meeting supply wagons, families greeting relatives, the constant movement of a frontier town that never quite stopped growing. He stood on the platform with his hat pulled low and his collar turned up against the cold, watching the road for the first sign of the stagecoach. When it finally appeared rounding the bend with its wheels cutting dark lines through the snow-packed road, his chest tightened. This was it. No turning back now. He had signed the contract. He had made the commitment. Whatever stepped off that coach was his responsibility for the next 3 months, the trial period they had agreed upon. After that they would see, extend the arrangement or dissolve it. Simple, practical, safe. The coach pulled to a stop with a spray of slush. The driver shouted commands. A gentleman in a wool coat stepped down, first turning to assist the passengers still inside. A woman's gloved hand appeared, accepting his help. Then, a boot practical leather well, made but not fancy. Caleb felt a small measure of relief. At least she was sensible. At least she understood where she was coming. But then the rest of her emerged, and every thought in his head went silent. The woman who stepped onto the platform was not what he had expected. Tall, nearly his own height, with dark hair swept back beneath a modest traveling bonnet. Her face was striking rather than beautiful, all strong angles and clear gray eyes that swept the platform with an intensity that made Caleb's pulse quicken. She carried herself with a kind of controlled grace, spine straight, movements precise. But it was not elegance he saw in her posture. It was something else. Something that looked like barely contained readiness, like a person who had learned to move through the world prepared for attack. Before Caleb could step forward, the woman turned back to the coach and extended her hand. Another figure emerged. A girl, younger, perhaps 17, with pale blonde hair and eyes that did not quite focus on anything. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days and moved with a kind of mechanical precision, following the older woman's lead without question or hesitation. Caleb's confusion must have shown on his face because the woman's gaze found his across the platform. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or the acknowledgement of mutual desperation. She walked toward him, the girl following a step behind. When she stopped, she was close enough that he could see the faint scar along her jawline, mostly hidden by the high collar of her traveling dress. Close enough to see that her hands, despite the expensive gloves, bore the telltale calluses of someone accustomed to hard work. "Mr. Hart," she said. Not a question. A statement delivered in a voice that was low and steady and carried an accent he could not quite place. Something Eastern, but with undertones of something else, something foreign. "Miss Whitlock," he replied, removing his hat. Her eyes moved to the girl beside her, then back to Caleb. "There has been a change in circumstances. This is Violet. She is traveling with me." Caleb stared at the girl. She did not meet his gaze, instead keeping her eyes fixed on some point past his shoulder. There was something wrong about the way she stood, too still, too quiet, like a creature that had learned the hard way that movement brought pain. "The contract did not mention anyone else," Caleb said, keeping his voice even. "I am aware." Eleanor's chin lifted slightly. "But I cannot leave her behind. She has nowhere else to go. That is not my concern." "Then we have a problem, Mr. Hart, because I will not come without her. You may take both of us, or you may take neither of us, but I will not abandon her." There was steel in her voice. Absolute. Final. Caleb looked past her to where the coach was already preparing to depart. Other passengers were disembarking, collecting bags, moving on with their lives. He could send her away, could refuse the arrangement entirely, return to his empty house and his empty days and the slow-grinding loneliness that had become his only companion. Or he could take a risk, again. "What relation is she to you?" he asked. A pause, brief but telling. "A cousin." Caleb did not believe her. Could not say why exactly, but something in the way Eleanor held herself, the way her hand hovered protectively near the girl's shoulder, spoke of a connection that went deeper than blood relation. But challenging her now in public would serve no purpose. 3 months, he said finally, trial period for both of you. You work, you contribute, you prove you can survive out here. After that, we decide if the arrangement continues. Those are the terms. The relief flickered across Eleanor's face so quick he almost missed it. Agreed. The ranch is 2 hours from town. The house is small. There is a spare room and a bunkhouse. You will have to share. We will manage. Caleb gestured toward the wagon. Then let us get your things loaded. Storm is coming. They had 2 trunks between them and a single carpet bag. Not much for 2 women starting new lives. Caleb loaded them onto the wagon bed while Eleanor helped Violet up onto the seat. When he climbed up beside them and took the reins, he was acutely aware of how crowded the bench felt with 3 people. Eleanor sat rigid in the middle, her hands folded in her lap. Violet pressed against her side like a child seeking shelter. The wagon rolled forward, wheels crunching on packed snow. Helena fell away behind them. The mountains loomed ahead, vast and indifferent. For the first 10 minutes, no one spoke. Caleb kept his attention on the road and the horses, but he could feel Eleanor's presence beside him, could sense the tension radiating from her in waves. Violet had not made a sound since stepping off the coach, had not even looked at him directly. Whatever her story was, it was not a happy one. "You are not what I expected," Caleb said finally, because the silence was becoming oppressive. "No." Eleanor's response was flat. "I imagine not. The agency said you were experienced in household management." "I am." "Where?" A longer pause this time. "Philadelphia." That explained the Eastern accent, though not the undertones. "Doing what exactly?" "Managing my father's household after my mother passed." Caleb digested this. "So you come from money. I come from comfort," Eleanor said carefully. "That is not the same as money. And I left both behind." "Why?" She turned to look at him then, and the expression in her gray eyes was hard as winter stone. "For the same reason you wrote to a matrimonial agency, Mr. Hart, because the life I had became unbearable, and this seemed like the only way to escape it." "Fair enough." Caleb was not inclined to press for details when he had no intention of sharing his own. "The work will be different from what you are used to." "I am aware. I mean completely different. No servants, no delegating. If a meal needs cooking, you cook it. If water needs hauling, you haul it. If the stock needs tending, you tend them. Every day. No breaks. I understand. Do you?" "Because managing staff and doing the work yourself are very different things." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I spent 10 years in my father's house, learning to be decorative and useful in equal measure. I know how to smile while my hands bleed. I know how to maintain appearances while dying inside. What I do not know, Mr. Hart, is how to live without fear. But I am willing to learn. Are you willing to teach?" The question caught him off guard. Not the words themselves, but the raw honesty beneath them. This was not the refined Eastern lady he had expected. This was someone who had been through something terrible and had chosen survival over safety. "I will teach you what you need to know," he said quietly. "The rest you will have to figure out yourself." They rode in silence after that. The road climbed through narrow passes, the mountains closing in on either side. Snow began to fall in earnest, thick flakes that caught in Eleanor's hair and on Violet's thin shoulders. Caleb pulled a buffalo robe from behind the seat and passed it to them. Eleanor accepted it with a nod and wrapped it around the girl who still had not spoken a single word. When the ranch finally came into view, spread out in the valley below them, Caleb watched Eleanor's face for any sign of disappointment or regret. The house looked small and dark against the white landscape. The outbuildings were weathered and functional. There was nothing welcoming about it, nothing soft, just hard survival in a hard land. But Eleanor's expression did not change. If anything, she seemed to relax slightly, as if the isolation itself was a comfort rather than a threat. "How many acres?" she asked. 600. "How many head of cattle?" 43 at last count. "Horses?" 5, including the 2 pulling this wagon. She nodded, processing information. "What about neighbors? Nearest ranch is 5 miles south. Town is Helena. I go in once a month for supplies unless there is an emergency. So we are alone." "Yes." "Good," Eleanor said quietly. "That is exactly what I wanted." Caleb guided the wagon down the slope toward the house. Smoke still rose from the chimney where he had banked the fire that morning. The barn door was secure. Everything was as he had left it, which was both reassuring and strange. In a few minutes, everything would change. He pulled the wagon up to the front door and set the brake. "I will get your trunks. You go on inside. Fire should still be warm." Eleanor climbed down before he could offer assistance, then turned to help Violet. The girl moved like someone half asleep, following Eleanor's gentle guidance without question. They disappeared through the front door while Caleb hefted the first trunk onto his shoulder. The house felt different with people in it. Smaller somehow, more alive. Eleanor stood in the center of the kitchen, slowly turning to take in the sparse furnishings, the cast-iron stove, the simple table with 2 chairs. Violet had moved to stand by the window, staring out at the falling snow with that same unfocused gaze. "The bedroom is through there," Caleb said, gesturing to a door on the right. "It is small, but it has a good bed and a wardrobe. You can have it. There is a bunkhouse out back where ranch hands usually stay. The girl can use that." "No," Eleanor said immediately. "Violet stays with me. The bunkhouse is warmer than you think. I keep it maintained." "Violet stays with me," Eleanor repeated, and there was no room for argument in her voice. Caleb set down the trunk. "Fine, you can share the room. I will take the other bedroom. Parlor is through that door. Not much to it. I do not use it often." "Where do you sleep now?" Eleanor asked, her gaze sharp. "The other bedroom. So you are giving us the better room. It gets morning sun." Seemed practical. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was being kind or condescending. Finally she nodded. "Thank you." Caleb retrieved the second trunk and the carpet bag. When he returned, Eleanor had removed her bonnet and coat. Without them, she looked younger, more vulnerable. The scar on her jaw was more visible now, a thin white line that disappeared beneath the high collar of her dress. There were others, he suspected. Hidden marks that told stories she had no intention of sharing. "I will make something for dinner," she said, "if you will show me where things are kept." He showed her the pantry, the root cellar, the way the stove worked. She listened with focused intensity, asking questions when she needed clarification, but mostly just absorbing information. Violet remained by the window, silent and still. "Does she speak?" Caleb asked quietly when Eleanor returned to the kitchen. "Sometimes." Eleanor's voice was soft. "When she feels safe. And she does not feel safe here. She does not feel safe anywhere. Not yet." What happened to her Eleanor's hands stilled on the vegetables she had begun chopping. That is her story to tell Mr. Hart. Not mine. He did not push. Whatever secrets these women carried, they would reveal them in their own time. Or not at all. Either way, it was not his business unless it affected the ranch. Dinner that night was simple but well prepared. Stew made from dried beef and root vegetables biscuits that were better than anything Caleb had managed in 3 years of cooking for himself. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the wind howling outside. Violet ate mechanically, her eyes downcast, while Eleanor watched her with the vigilance of a mother hen. After dinner, Caleb showed them the rest of the house, the parlor with its 2 chairs and cold fireplace. The small bedroom he had given them, barely large enough for the single bed and wardrobe. His own room larger, but equally sparse. "You will need more blankets," he said. "Nights get cold. There are extras in the wardrobe." "We will manage," Eleanor said again. That seemed to be her answer to everything. "We will manage." As if survival was simply a matter of will and determination. Perhaps it was. Caleb had certainly survived on little else these past 3 years. He left them to settle in and retreated to the barn, needing space and solitude to process the day's changes. The horses greeted him with soft whickers. He checked their water, distributed feed, performed the familiar tasks that required no thought. But his mind kept circling back to the house, to the 2 women now occupying space he had kept empty for so long. Eleanor was not what he had expected, not weak or helpless or decorative. She carried herself like someone who had learned to fight, who had been broken, and had put herself back together with whatever materials were at hand. And Violet, silent and damaged, was clearly running from something terrible. What had he gotten himself into? When he finally returned to the house an hour later, the kitchen had been cleaned and reorganized. Small changes, but noticeable. Dishes stacked more efficiently. Supplies arranged with logic. Eleanor's presence already making itself felt. He found her sitting by the kitchen stove, mending a shirt by lamplight. Violet was nowhere to be seen. She is sleeping, Eleanor said without looking up. The journey exhausted her. Caleb poured himself coffee and sat at the table. We should establish some rules. All right, you work, you contribute, you respect the property. In return, I provide shelter, food, and safety. The trial period is 3 months. After that, we decide if this arrangement continues. Agreed. I go to town once a month. You can come or stay, your choice. But if you come, you represent this ranch. That means decent behavior and no trouble. I have no intention of causing trouble, Mr. Hart. No drinking, no gambling, no entertaining men. She looked up at that one eyebrow raised. Do I strike you as the type to entertain men? I do not know what type you are. That is the point. Fair enough? She returned to her mending. I have one rule of my own. What is it? Violet is off limits. No questions about her past, no attempts to send her away, no expectations beyond basic courtesy. She stays or I go. Non-negotiable. Caleb considered this. Why? Because she has been through enough, and I will not allow anyone to hurt her again, even unintentionally. There was steel beneath those words, absolute conviction. Whatever bond existed between these two women, it was forged in something dark and painful. All right, Caleb said. She stays. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of thread through fabric. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The storm was building. By morning, they would be snowed in. Caleb studied Eleanor in the lamplight. The way her hands moved with practiced precision. The way she held her shoulders always tense, always ready. The way her eyes flicked to the door every few minutes, as if expecting someone to burst through. She was afraid. He recognized it because he had lived with fear for so long, but her fear was different from his. His was the fear of loss, of loving and losing again. Hers was the fear of being found, of something from her past catching up with her. "What are you running from?" he asked quietly. Her hands stilled. She looked at him, and for a moment he saw past her careful control to something raw and desperate beneath. "The same thing you are, Mr. Hart. The past. And if we are both very lucky, it will never find us here." She rose, gathered her mending, and disappeared into the bedroom. The door closed softly behind her. Caleb sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the storm build and wondering what he had invited into his home. Two damaged women with secrets they would not share. A girl who did not speak and a woman who moved like a survivor of violence, and himself a man with 4 graves and a heart so scarred it could barely feel anymore. This was a mistake. He knew it with bone-deep certainty. But it was too late to turn back now. The storm was here in more ways than one, and all he could do was weather it and hope something survived when it finally passed. He banked the fire, checked the locks, and went to his own room. But sleep did not come easily. Through the thin wall he could hear soft sounds from the next room. Eleanor's voice, low and soothing, speaking words he could not make out, and then faintly singing. A melody he did not recognize in a language that was definitely not English. German, he realized after a moment. She was singing in German. But the agency had said she was from Philadelphia, daughter of a banker. Why would she know German, and not just know it, but sing with the comfort of a native speaker? More questions, more mysteries, more reasons to be cautious. Caleb pressed his hands against his face and tried to quiet his mind. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to regret this decision. But tonight all he could do was lie in the darkness and listen to a stranger sing lullabies in a foreign tongue to a girl who would not speak. The first week passed in a blur of awkward coexistence and mutual adjustment. Eleanor proved herself capable beyond Caleb's expectations. She rose before dawn, started fires prepared, meals cleaned with efficient thoroughness. She learned the layout of the ranch, quickly asked intelligent questions about the livestock and land management, and took mental notes on everything. Violet remained silent and withdrawn, but she worked without complaint. Simple tasks at first. Gathering eggs, feeding chickens, hauling water. She moved through each duty with the same mechanical precision, never speaking, never meeting anyone's eyes directly. Caleb gave them space, focusing on his own work. Fences needed mending. The barn roof needed patching. Hay had to be distributed to the cattle twice daily. The familiar rhythms of ranch life provided structure and distance. But at night he could not escape the strangeness of having others in the house. The sounds of feminine presence, soft voices in the next room, the rustle of fabric, the occasional splash of water in the basin, and always Eleanor's vigilance. She slept lightly, if at all. More than once Caleb woke in the night to hear her moving through the house, checking doors and windows. She was keeping watch. But for what? Or for whom? On the fifth night Caleb discovered one answer. He woke to use the privy and found Eleanor standing by the kitchen window staring out at the darkness. She wore a nightgown and had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and in her right hand, held low and ready, was a knife. Not a kitchen knife. A hunting blade, sharp and deadly. She sensed his presence and turned the knife, coming up instinctively before she recognized him. Then she lowered it, her face carefully neutral. "Could not sleep," she said. "Neither could I." He moved to the stove, stirred the banked coals, added wood. "What are you watching for?" "Nothing. Everything. Old habits. From Philadelphia. From before." He did not ask before what. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee and offered one to her. She accepted it, but kept the knife in her other hand. They stood together in the darkness, drinking bitter coffee and listening to the night sounds. Coyotes in the distance, the wind through the pines, the creak and settle of old timber. "I am not going to hurt you," Caleb said finally. "Or the girl. You understand that." "I understand that is what you believe," Eleanor replied. "But men often do not realize the harm they cause simply by existing in proximity to women who have learned to fear them. Have you been hurt?" She looked at him over the rim of her cup, and her eyes were old. Older than 28 years should allow. "Yes, by your father, among others." He wanted to ask more, to understand the shadows that haunted her. But he recognized that same hunger for privacy in her that he felt about his own past. Some wounds were too deep to share with strangers. "I will not ask you to trust me," he said instead, "but I will ask you to give me a chance to prove I am not like whoever hurt you before." Eleanor set down her cup. "Trust is earned, Mr. Hart, not requested." "But I appreciate the intention." She moved past him toward the bedroom, the knife still in her hand. At the door, she paused. "The girl has nightmares," she said quietly. "If you hear her scream, do not come to the room. I will handle it. Men make it worse." Then she was gone, leaving Caleb alone with his coffee and his questions. The blizzard hit on the 9th day. Caleb had seen it coming, had prepared as much as possible. Extra hay in the barn, water troughs filled, firewood stacked high. But Montana storms in February were unpredictable and merciless, and this one came with a violence that shook the house and turned the world white. He woke to Eleanor shaking his shoulder, her face pale in the pre-dawn darkness. "The wind," she said. "It sounds like the house is coming apart." He dressed quickly and went to assess. Snow already drifted against the north wall, piling up toward the windows. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight, and the cattle were out in the far pasture, exposed and vulnerable. "I have to get them to shelter," he told Eleanor, "the barn and the near shed. If I do not, we will lose half the herd." In this, she looked toward the window where snow drove horizontal. No choice. He pulled on his heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his face. "I will rope myself to the porch, standard practice. Follow the fence line to the pasture, drive the cattle back. How long will it take?" 2 hours, maybe 3. "And if you get lost?" He did not answer that. They both knew what happened to men who got lost in blizzards, but the cattle represented their food security for the year. Losing them meant starvation later. Eleanor grabbed his arm before he could reach the door. "Take me with you." "No. You just said you might get lost. 2 people have a better chance than 1. You have never worked cattle in a storm. Then teach me. Now, quickly." There was no time to argue, and she was right. 2 people were safer than 1. He found her a heavy coat, wrapped her in scarves, showed her how to tie the safety rope around her waist. "You stay behind me," he instructed. "You do not let go of the rope. You do exactly what I say when I say it. If I tell you to go back to the house, you go. Understood?" "Understood." They went out into the white fury together. The wind hit like a physical blow, driving snow into their faces hard enough to blind. Caleb could barely see the barn 30 yards away. He secured one end of the rope to the porch rail and began moving toward the fence line, Eleanor following close behind. The cold was immediate and brutal. Within minutes, his face was numb, his hands clumsy, despite thick gloves. Beside him, Eleanor struggled, but did not falter. She kept pace, kept her grip on the rope, kept moving forward. They reached the fence and followed it north toward the pasture. The cattle were huddled in a group, their backs to the wind, snow already building up on their hides. Caleb counted quickly. 41 visible, 2 missing, probably already dead. He moved to the far side of the herd and began pushing them south toward the shelter. Eleanor positioned herself on the near side without being told, helping drive them forward. The cattle moved reluctantly, fighting the wind, but they moved. It took 90 minutes to get them all into the shelter shed and the barn. By the time Caleb secured the last gate, he could barely feel his hands or feet. His face was raw frost burned. Beside him, Eleanor swayed with exhaustion, her lips blue, her breathing labored. Back to the house, he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. Now. They followed the rope back, stumbling through drifts that were already waist-deep. The house appeared suddenly out of the white, a dark shape that meant warmth and safety. They fell through the door together, and Eleanor slammed it shut behind them. For a long moment, they simply stood there, breathing hard, ice falling from their clothes. Then Eleanor moved to the stove and began heating water. "Sit," she ordered. "Your face is frost-burned." Caleb sat because his legs would not hold him anymore. Eleanor brought a basin of lukewarm water and a cloth. She knelt before him and began gently dabbing at his cheeks and forehead, warming the frozen skin gradually. "This will hurt," she warned. It did. As feeling returned, the burning sensation was almost unbearable. But her hands were steady and sure, her movements practiced and efficient. "You have done this before," Caleb said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "Yes." "Where?" Her hands paused for just a moment. "Germany, when I was young, before Philadelphia." "So you lied about being from Philadelphia." "I lived in Philadelphia," Eleanor said carefully, "but I was not born there. I was born in Bavaria. Came to America when I was 10. Why lie? Because people judge. Because Americans do not trust immigrants. Because a mail-order bride has a better chance if she sounds like she belongs. Fair enough?" He watched her work, studying the concentration on her face. "Why did you leave Germany?" "My father worked in mines. He died in a collapse. My mother brought me here hoping for a better life. She died 2 years later. I was raised in—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "In what?" Caleb prompted. "An institution," she said finally. "For orphans. It was not kind. And then I survived. That is all you need to know." She finished treating his face and moved to warm her own hands by the fire. Caleb sat in silence, processing this new information. Eleanor Whitlock was not who she claimed to be. But then neither was he entirely honest about his past. They were both survivors, both carrying damage they chose not to share. Perhaps that was enough. 2 broken people trying to survive in a broken world. The storm lasted 3 days. Caleb made the trip to the barn and back twice daily, Eleanor insisting on coming with him each time, despite the danger. They worked in tandem, learning each other's rhythms, developing the unspoken communication of people who had to trust each other to survive. Violet remained in the house, keeping fires burning and meals ready. On the second night, Caleb woke to the sound of screaming. He was halfway to the bedroom door before he remembered Eleanor's warning. Men make it worse. He forced himself to stop, to stand in the hallway and listen to Violet's terror and Eleanor's soothing response. The screaming subsided into sobs. Then Eleanor's voice, low and gentle, singing that same German lullaby. After a while, silence. In the morning, neither woman mentioned it. But Violet's eyes were red and swollen, and Eleanor moved with the exhaustion of someone who had not slept at all. What nightmares haunt her, Caleb wondered. What had been done to that girl to leave her so shattered, and what had Eleanor done to escape whoever had hurt them both? On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Caleb went out to assess damage and found 2 cattle dead, frozen in the far corner of the pasture where they had not made it to shelter in time. He buried them as best he could in the frozen ground, adding 2 more failures to his tally. When he returned to the house, Eleanor had coffee ready and a concerned expression on her face. "Lost 2 head," he reported. "Could have been worse. I am sorry." He shrugged. "It happens, part of ranching." They sat together at the kitchen table, warming their hands on cups of hot coffee. Outside, the sun broke through clouds for the first time in days, turning the snow-covered landscape blindingly bright. "Thank you for your help during the storm," Caleb said. "I could not have managed alone." "We are partners," Eleanor replied. "That was the agreement. You help me survive, I help you survive." Partners. The word settled between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to examine. The week after the storm brought new challenges and new revelations. Caleb's best mare Willow went into labor 2 months early. He found her in the barn one morning, her sides heaving, her eyes rolling with pain and fear. He called for Eleanor and Violet, and they came running. Eleanor took one look at the situation and began issuing calm instructions, her medical knowledge evident in the way she assessed the mare's condition. "The foal is positioned wrong," she said, after a careful examination. "You will have to turn it." "I know." Caleb was already rolling up his sleeves, his mind racing through everything he knew about difficult births. It was a gamble. He might save them both or lose them both. The memory of Sarah's death loomed large in his mind, the helplessness of watching her bleed out while the doctor worked frantically and failed. Eleanor seemed to sense his hesitation. "You can do this," she said quietly. "I have seen you work. You are good with animals. Trust your instincts." He worked by feel his arm deep inside the mare, searching for the foal's positioning. There! A leg folded back, the head turned wrong. He would have to push the foal back slightly, reposition everything. It took 30 minutes of careful manipulation. Willow screamed and thrashed. Violet held her head, murmuring softly. Eleanor monitored Caleb's work, ready to assist. Finally, he felt the foal shift into proper position. Almost there, he gasped. Just a little more. But even as he said it, he knew something was wrong. The foal was not moving, not responding. The heartbeat he should have felt was absent. "No," he whispered. "No, come on." Willow pushed her body, doing what nature designed it to do. The foal emerged in a rush of fluid and membrane. It lay utterly still. Caleb's hands moved automatically, clearing airways, rubbing the small ribcage, trying to stimulate breathing. Eleanor joined him, her hands working alongside his. They tried everything. Breathing into the foal's nose, chest compressions, desperate measures born of hope and fear. Nothing. The foal was dead. Had probably been dead for hours before labor even began. Willow, exhausted but alive, turned her head to investigate. Her nose found her baby, and she made a low, keening sound that cut Caleb to the bone. He sat back on his heels, covered in blood and birth fluids, and felt something break inside him. 4 people buried. Now this. Another life he could not save. Another failure to add to the list. "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. "We tried." "Trying does not matter," Caleb heard himself say. "Results matter. And the result is another dead thing that I could not save." He stood abruptly and walked out of the barn. Behind him, Eleanor called his name, but he could not stop, could not face them, could not accept comfort when comfort was a lie. He found himself at the cemetery, standing before those 4 graves, with snow falling gently around him. The foal would make 5 deaths on his watch. 5 pieces of evidence that he was not meant to protect anything, that everything he touched eventually died. The rage came suddenly overwhelming. He grabbed a fence post and pulled, muscles straining until the old wood splintered and broke. Then another, and another, destroying with his bare hands because destruction was all he seemed capable of. "I cannot do this," he shouted at the graves, at God, at the indifferent Montana sky. "I cannot keep losing. I cannot keep failing. Everything I touch dies." Arms wrapped around him from behind, small but strong. Eleanor holding him as he shook with grief and fury. "That is not true," she said firmly. "You saved me. You saved Violet. You saved 41 cattle in a blizzard. You saved Willow. 1 death does not erase all that life. You do not understand." Caleb gasped. "You do not know what I have lost. Then tell me." And he did. Standing there in the snow, held by a woman he barely knew, he told her everything. About Mary and the twins, about Sarah and the baby girl. About 3 years of guilt and isolation, and the crushing certainty that he was cursed, that love and life and hope were luxuries he had no right to anymore. Eleanor listened without interruption. When he finally fell silent, she turned him to face her. Her gray eyes were wet with tears, but her voice was steady. "I understand more than you know," she said, "because I have lost people too, and I carry guilt that would crush me if I let it. But I am still here, Caleb, still breathing, still trying. And so are you. That has to mean something." "What if it means nothing?" he whispered. "What if we are just delaying the inevitable? Then we delay it together." She reached up and wiped tears from his frozen face. "Whatever else happens, you are not alone in this anymore. Do you understand? You are not alone." Something in her voice, in her touch, cut through his despair. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his own pain reflected back. This woman who sang German lullabies and slept with a knife. This survivor who had traveled across a country to escape something terrible. This damaged, beautiful, impossibly strong person who had somehow ended up in his life. "There is something I have not told you," Eleanor said quietly. "Something I need you to know." "What is it?" Her hands dropped from his face. She stepped back, and her expression shifted, became guarded, afraid. "I told you I was running from my past," she began. "That was true, but I did not tell you what I was running from, or what I did." Caleb waited, sensing they had reached some crucial threshold. "I am not just afraid of being found, Caleb. I am afraid of what I am capable of, because everyone who has ever loved me I have destroyed." "What does that mean?" She looked away toward the mountains, toward anywhere but his face. "It means that I have done things, terrible things, things that a good person would never do. And if you knew the truth about me, you would send me away. You would be right to send me away." "Tell me," Caleb said. "Whatever it is, tell me." Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were full of a pain so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. "In Philadelphia, I was not my father's daughter, managing his household. I was property, owned by a man who called himself my husband, but was really my jailer. For 5 years She stopped, her breath catching. "For 5 years I endured things I will not speak of. And when I finally had the chance to escape, when I finally found the strength to fight back, She could not finish. But Caleb understood. The scars on her jaw and hidden beneath her clothes, the way she moved like a survivor of violence, the knife she kept close, the nightmares that woke Violet screaming. "You killed him," Caleb said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Eleanor's eyes snapped to his wide with shock. "I tried to," she whispered. "I wanted to. I stabbed him 7 times while he slept, and I felt nothing but satisfaction as he bled. And then I ran. Took Violet and ran because I knew if I stayed they would hang me for murder. Is he dead? I do not know." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I left him bleeding. Maybe he died. Maybe he survived. Either way, I am a wanted woman. There is a price on my head, and if they find me, Caleb, they will take me back, and they will kill me." The confession hung between them raw and terrible. This woman he had invited into his home was a fugitive, possibly a murderer, definitely running from the law. He should send her away, should protect himself and his ranch from the trouble she represented, should maintain the safe distance he had worked so hard to build around his heart. Instead, he reached for her hand. "Did he deserve it?" Caleb asked quietly. Eleanor's breath caught. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. Because I would have done the same. He would have deserved worse," she said, and her voice was full of old hate. "He deserved every wound and more. Then you did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that. The law would disagree. To hell with the law." Caleb pulled her closer. "You are here now, under my protection. And if anyone comes looking for you, they will have to go through me." Eleanor stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk that for me?" "Because I know what it is like to carry guilt that should not be yours to carry. Because I know what it is like to need a second chance. And because—" he paused, surprised by the truth of what he was about to say. "Because you matter to me, Eleanor. More than is probably wise." She collapsed against his chest, sobbing. He held her while she cried there in the snow beside the graves of his past and felt something shift inside him. The armor he had built around his heart began to crack. Not breaking entirely, but letting in light, letting in possibility. When her tears finally subsided, Eleanor pulled back and looked up at him. "There is more," she said, "about Violet, about why we are really here. Tell me." "Not here." She glanced toward the house. "Inside, where it is warm, because this will take time and you need to know everything before you decide if we can stay." They walked back to the house together. Inside, Violet was tending the fire, her movements still mechanical but somehow less fragile than before. She looked up when they entered, and something passed between her and Eleanor, a question and an answer. Eleanor nodded. "We are telling him." Violet's eyes went wide, but she did not protest. Instead, she moved to sit at the table, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Caleb poured coffee for all three of them and sat down. Whatever was coming, he would face it. Whatever new revelations these women had, he would listen. Because he had already decided, standing in the snow with Eleanor's tears on his shirt, that he was not letting them go, not unless they chose to leave. "All right," he said, "I am listening." And Eleanor began to speak. Eleanor sat very still at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, as if drawing warmth from the ceramic could give her strength for what came next. Violet remained motionless beside her, eyes downcast, waiting. Caleb could feel the weight of whatever truth was about to emerge heavy as the snow that still buried the ranch. "My real name is Eleanor Vogel." Eleanor began, her voice low and steady, despite the tremor Caleb could see in her hands. "I was born in a mining town outside Munich in 1858. My father was Heinrich Vogel. He worked the coal mines 16 hours a day for wages that barely kept us fed. My mother was Anna. She took in washing to help make ends meet." She paused, took a breath, continued. "When I was 10, there was a collapse. 37 men died, including my father. The mine owners paid nothing to the families. No compensation, no pension, nothing. My mother had a cousin in Pennsylvania who wrote that America had opportunities, that German immigrants could find work and maybe build something better. So we came." Caleb listened without interrupting, watching the play of emotions across her face. Pain, anger, old grief rising to the surface. "We arrived in 1868. My mother found work in a textile mill. I was too young for the mill, so I cleaned houses, ran errands, did whatever would bring in a few coins. We lived in a tenement in a German neighborhood where nobody spoke English and everybody was just trying to survive one more day." "Where in Pennsylvania?" Caleb asked. "Pittsburgh." Eleanor's mouth twisted. "Coal country, just like Bavaria. My mother used to say we crossed an ocean to end up in the same hole." "What happened to her?" "Tuberculosis. She lasted 2 years. I was 12 when she died. The people who ran our tenement building did not keep children who could not pay rent. I ended up in an orphanage run by a Lutheran charity. It was not kind, as I said before, but it was shelter." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the cup. "Go." She was staring past Caleb, now seeing something he could not. "I stayed there until I was 18, worked in their laundry, learned to cook, learned to sew, learned to keep my head down and my mouth shut. And then one day a man came to the orphanage. He said he was looking for a housekeeper. Someone young, strong, capable. The matron suggested me." "Thomas Whitlock," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor's eyes snapped to his, sharp with surprise. How did you said you were running from your husband, that you stabbed him." It was not hard to connect. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Thomas Whitlock. He owned 3 coal mines and had investments in railways and steel. A widower with no children, or so I thought at the time. He told the matron he needed someone to manage his household, keep it clean, prepare meals, handle basic accounts. The work would be hard, but the pay was fair, room and board included. But that was not what he really wanted," Caleb said. "No." Eleanor's voice went flat. "That was not what he wanted at all." Beside her, Violet made a small sound. Eleanor's hand immediately found hers, their fingers lacing together. A gesture of comfort so automatic it spoke of long practice. "For the first 6 months, it was exactly as promised. I managed his house, cooked his meals, kept everything in order. He was polite, distant, appropriate. I thought I had found security. Stupid girl that I was! You were 18 and alone, Caleb said. That is not stupid, that is desperate. There is a difference. Eleanor looked at him, something shifting in her expression. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition of shared understanding. On my 19th birthday, he called me into his study, said he had a gift for me. A new dress, he said, something fine. I should try it on. When I hesitated, he insisted, so I went to my room and changed. The dress was beautiful, expensive. Too expensive for a housekeeper. She stopped, swallowed hard. When I came back to show him, he had brandy poured. 2 glasses, he said we should celebrate. That I had been such a good girl, so useful, so pretty. And then he— You do not have to say it, Caleb interrupted gently. I understand. No. Eleanor's voice was suddenly fierce. No, I do need to say it, because for 5 years I told myself it was not that bad, that I was being dramatic, that other women had it worse. And those lies kept me trapped as surely as any lock. She met his eyes directly. He raped me that night. And when I tried to leave the next morning, he told me I could not, that I had nowhere to go, no money, no family, that the law would not believe an orphan immigrant over a respected businessman, that if I tried to run, he would have me arrested for theft and see me hanged. Caleb felt rage building in his chest, hot and sharp. But he kept his face neutral, his voice calm. So he kept you prisoner. He called it marriage. Took me to a judge he owned and had papers signed. I was his wife in the eyes of the law, his property. For 5 years I lived in that house and endured everything. She paused. He had particular tastes, cruel ones. The scars you have seen are only some of them. Violet's hand tightened on Eleanor's. The girl was crying silently, tears tracking down her pale cheeks. But I survived, Eleanor continued. I survived by becoming small, quiet, obedient. By pretending I was somewhere else while he used me. By telling myself that someday, somehow I would find a way out. How did Violet come into this? Caleb asked, looking at the girl. Eleanor glanced at Violet, a question in her eyes. The girl nodded, permission given. 3 years into my imprisonment, Thomas brought home a child. Violet was 14, skinny, terrified. He said she was the daughter of a business associate who had died owing him money, that he was taking her in out of charity. I knew it was a lie. I could see in her eyes what I saw in my own mirror every morning. Terror, helplessness. What was the truth? Caleb asked Violet directly. The girl looked up, met his gaze for perhaps the first time since arriving. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. He is my father. My mother was a seamstress who worked in one of his factories. She died when I was 13. He took me from the orphanage, brought me to his house, and told Miss Eleanor I was to be trained in household duties. Trained for what? Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer. For his brothel, Eleanor said flatly. Thomas did not just own mines and railways. He owned 3 brothels in Pittsburgh. High-class establishments for wealthy men. Girls were expensive to acquire. Easier to raise them yourself from childhood. Caleb's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. This man. But I knew time was running out. Last November, she turned 17. Thomas started bringing men to the house. Potential clients, he called them. Letting them look at the merchandise. Violet's breathing had quickened. Eleanor squeezed her hand. One night in December, he had a party. Important men, politicians, judges, business owners. He told me to prepare Violet, to dress her in something revealing, and bring her downstairs. She would entertain the guests, he said. Show them what she had learned. I knew what that meant. Knew if I let her go down those stairs, she would never be the same. So I made a choice. You killed him, Caleb said. I tried. Eleanor's eyes were hard. I went to the kitchen, got the largest knife I could find, went to his bedroom after the guests left, and he was asleep drunk on expensive brandy, and I stabbed him. Once for every year I spent in that house. 7 times. Her voice did not shake, did not waver. She recounted the violence with the same flat calm she might use to describe baking bread. I aimed for his chest, his stomach, anywhere that would bleed fast. He woke on the 3rd stab, started screaming, tried to fight me off, but I was stronger than he expected, stronger than I expected. All that rage I had buried for 5 years came pouring out, and I kept stabbing until he stopped moving. What happened then? Caleb asked. Eleanor looked at Violet. The girl took a shaky breath and continued the story. I heard the screaming and came running, found Miss Eleanor standing over him, covered in blood, still holding the knife. At first I thought she had gone mad. Then I saw his face, saw him bleeding, and I felt nothing but relief. We knew we had to run, Eleanor said. The servants were gone for the night, but they would be back by dawn. We had maybe 6 hours. I went to Thomas's study, opened his safe. I knew the combination because he made me count his money sometimes, liked to show me what I would never have. How much did you take? Caleb asked. $5,000, enough to disappear. I also took jewelry, documents, anything that might be valuable. Then we packed what we could carry, stole 2 of his horses, and rode through the night. By morning, we were 30 miles away. By the next day, we had sold the horses and bought passage west. You have been running ever since. For 3 months, we changed our names. I became Eleanor Whitlock, daughter of a Philadelphia banker, created a whole false history. When I saw the matrimonial agency advertisement, it seemed like the perfect solution. A new life in a place so remote that no one from Pittsburgh would ever think to look. Eleanor set down her coffee cup, her hands steadier now that the worst of the confession was done. So, now you know, Mr. Hart, I am a thief and an attempted murderer. Violet is the illegitimate daughter of the man I tried to kill. We are both fugitives, and if anyone discovers who we really are, we will hang. The kitchen fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Outside, a raven called. Inside, 3 people sat with the weight of truth between them. Caleb stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the snow-covered ranch, the mountains beyond the vast emptiness of Montana Territory. This land had no room for civilization's complications. Out here, survival mattered more than legal niceties. Right and wrong were measured in simpler terms. He turned back to face them. This man, Thomas Whitlock. If he survived your attack, will he come after you? Eleanor's face went pale. I do not know. We left him bleeding. I thought he was dead, but I have been afraid to check. Afraid that if I look too hard, I will draw attention. So I do not know if I am wanted for murder or attempted murder. I do not know if he is alive or dead. And if he is alive, Caleb pressed, if he survived and he knows you are gone, what would he do? He would hunt us. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas does not forgive, does not forget. If he survived, he will spend every resource he has to find us, and when he does, Caleb interrupted, he will have to go through me. Both women stared at him. You cannot mean that, Eleanor said. You cannot risk yourself for what? For 2 women who trusted me enough to tell me the truth, for people who have worked beside me, helped me survive, proven themselves capable and honest. He moved back to the table, placed his hands flat on the surface. You asked me if it mattered whether he deserved what you did to him. I will ask you the same question. Did he deserve it? Yes, Eleanor said without hesitation. Then as far as I am concerned, you did the world a service. If he is dead, good. If he is alive, he should have died. And if he comes here looking for you, he will find that Montana men do not take kindly to those who hurt women and children. Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. You do not understand what you are saying. Thomas Whitlock has money, has power, has connections that reach into every level of government and law enforcement. If you help us, if you protect us, you will make an enemy of a man who can destroy you. Let him try, Caleb said flatly. This is my land, my home, and you are my wife under territorial law. That makes you my responsibility. I do not abandon my responsibilities. Something broke in Eleanor's expression. The careful control she had maintained throughout the confession crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Caleb came around the table and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against his chest and wept. Great shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame. 5 years of pain and fear and rage pouring out in his kitchen while Violet watched with wide, wondering eyes. When Eleanor finally quieted, she did not pull away, just stood there, her face pressed against his shirt, breathing in unsteady gasps. I have been alone so long, she whispered, carrying this by myself. I did not know how heavy it was until someone offered to help. You are not alone anymore, Caleb said. Neither of you are. Whatever comes, We face it together." Violet spoke up, her voice small but clear. "There is something else, something Miss Eleanor does not know about." Both Caleb and Eleanor turned to look at her. "The night we left," Violet continued after Miss Eleanor went to pack, "I went back to his study. I was looking for money, anything we could use, and I found something." "What did you find?" Eleanor asked. "A ledger." Violet's hands twisted in her lap, hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer. It had records, names, dates, amounts, all the illegal things he had done, bribes to judges, payoffs to police, names of girls he had bought and sold, names of men who used his brothels, everything. Eleanor's eyes went wide. "You took it," Violet nodded. "I thought it might be useful, might protect us somehow if anyone came after us. I have been carrying it ever since, hidden in my trunk. I did not tell you because I was afraid you would make me destroy it. But now it might be the only thing that keeps us alive," Caleb finished. "If Whitlock comes after you with the law, that ledger is leverage, proof of his crimes, insurance." He looked at Eleanor. "Did you know about this?" "No." Eleanor was staring at Violet with something like awe. "You brilliant, brilliant girl. All this time, I wanted to protect you," Violet said simply. "The way you protected me." Caleb sat back down, his mind working through implications. This changed things. With evidence of Whitlock's crimes, they had options. Bargaining power, a way to fight back if he came. If he came. The question was whether Thomas Whitlock had survived 7 stab wounds and 3 months of recovery. Whether he had the resources and motivation to track 2 runaway women across a continent. Whether... The sound of hoofbeats cut through Caleb's thoughts. He moved to the window and saw a rider approaching. A man on a good horse dressed too well for a common ranch hand or drifter. "Trouble," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor and Violet both went still. "How can you tell? Because good horses and fine clothes in Montana usually mean one of 2 things, businessman or lawman. And businessmen do not ride alone this far from town." The rider pulled up at the porch. Caleb stepped outside, leaving Eleanor and Violet in the kitchen. The man who dismounted was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and a hard face. He wore a long coat that did not quite hide the gun at his hip. "Mr. Hart," the man said. Not a question. He already knew. "That is right. And you are Harrison Wolfe." The man did not offer his hand. "I am a Pinkerton detective working a case. I am looking for 2 women. Thought you might have seen them." Caleb kept his expression neutral. "What women?" Wolfe pulled a folded paper from his coat, a photograph worn at the edges. He held it up. Eleanor and Violet, taken perhaps a year ago. The image was clear enough to be recognizable. Eleanor Whitlock and Violet Whitlock, Wolfe said. Wanted in connection with theft and assault in Pennsylvania. Last known heading was west. Thought they might have come through Helena. Why would you think that? Caleb asked, his heart hammering. Because 3 months ago, someone matching Eleanor Whitlock's description corresponded with a matrimonial agency in Helena. Agency records show she was matched with a rancher named Caleb Hart. Wolfe's eyes were cold. "That would be you." Caleb met his gaze steadily. "I did correspond with an agency. Woman I was matched with never showed. I have been running this ranch alone. Is that so?" Wolfe looked past him toward the house. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Yes, I do mind. This is private property. I could get a warrant, then get one. Until you do, you are trespassing." Wolfe's jaw tightened. "You protecting someone?" "Mr. Hart, I am protecting my privacy and my property rights. This is Montana territory, not Pennsylvania. We take the 4th Amendment seriously out here." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Wolfe nodded slowly. "I will be back," he said, "with a warrant and the sheriff. If those women are here obstructing a lawful investigation, we'll make you an accessory to their crimes. That is prison time. If they were here, I would tell you. But they are not, so I suggest you stop wasting your time on my land and go look elsewhere." Wolfe mounted his horse. 2 days, he said. "I will have my warrant in 2 days. After that, Mr. Hart, things get very unpleasant for anyone hiding fugitives." He rode off without waiting for a response. Caleb watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then went back inside. Eleanor stood in the middle of the kitchen, her face ashen. "You lied for me." "I did." "Why?" "Because you are my wife. Because what that man described is not the woman I know. Because I believe in your version of events more than his. He knows we are here," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. He will come back, with authority, with force. We have to run. No, Caleb's voice was firm. Running will just confirm your guilt. We stay. We prepare. We fight if we have to. You cannot fight the law. I can fight unjust law. And a warrant based on a Pinkerton suspicion is not the same as proof of guilt. Violet spoke up from the corner where she had been standing silently. The ledger. We should use the ledger. Caleb nodded. Where is it? In my trunk, hidden under a false bottom. Violet moved toward the bedroom. I can get it. She returned minutes later with a leather-bound book worn and stained. She handed it to Caleb with reverent care. He opened it and began reading. Page after page of meticulous records, names he recognized from newspapers, judges, politicians, police captains, amounts paid, services rendered, and, worse, lists of girls. Ages, descriptions, prices paid and prices charged. A catalog of human misery recorded in neat columns. This is evidence of dozens of crimes, Caleb said quietly. Trafficking, bribery, corruption. If this became public, Thomas Whitlock and everyone in his pocket would be destroyed, Eleanor finished. That is why Violet hid it, why she did not tell me. It is too dangerous to use unless we have no other choice. We may have no choice, Caleb said. If Wolf comes back with a warrant if they try to take you, this ledger is our leverage. We threaten to make it public. Every newspaper between here and Washington gets a copy. And if that does not work, Eleanor asked, then we use the one advantage we have that Wolf does not expect. What advantage? Caleb met her eyes. The fact that I am willing to kill to protect what is mine. And you are mine, Eleanor. Both of you are. That is not negotiable. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Eleanor stared at him, and Caleb could see her reassessing, recalibrating her understanding of who he was. You would do that, she said softly. Kill for us. I have killed for less, Caleb replied, and regretted it. I would not regret killing someone who tried to hurt my family. Family. The word hung in the air. Eleanor's breath caught. Is that what we are? She whispered. Family, what else would you call it? Two broken people and a damaged girl choosing to stand together against the world. Sounds like family to me. Eleanor crossed the space between them and took his face in her hands. For a long moment she just looked at him, searching for something in his expression. Then slowly, deliberately, she kissed him. It was not passionate, not desperate. Just a gentle press of lips, warm and soft and full of gratitude, and something that might, given time, become love. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. Thank you, she said, for seeing us as worth protecting. You are worth protecting, Caleb said. Both of you. Violet had tears streaming down her face. No one has ever, she began, then stopped. No one has ever chosen us before. Everyone always chooses themselves. Well, Caleb said, maybe it is time someone made a different choice. The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Caleb cleaned and loaded every weapon on the ranch. 3 rifles, 2 pistols, a shotgun. He showed Eleanor how to shoot, and she proved a quick study. Violet was too shaken to handle firearms, but she could reload, could watch from windows, could sound alarm. They discussed strategies. If Wolf returned with force, where would they make their stand? The house was defensible, but could be surrounded. The barn offered height, but poor escape routes. Better to meet them in the open, Caleb decided. Show strength, not fear. On the second night, Eleanor found him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing. She knocked softly on the doorframe. May I come in? He nodded. She entered and sat beside him, close but not touching. I have been thinking about what you said, she began, about family, about choosing each other, and I realize I have not been entirely honest with you about something. Caleb's chest tightened. What? How I feel about you, Eleanor's voice was quiet. I came here expecting a business arrangement, room and board in exchange for labor. I thought I would keep my distance, protect my heart, never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. But you have made that impossible, Eleanor. No, let me finish. She turned to face him. You have been kind when I expected cruelty, patient when I expected demands, protective when I expected indifference. You have seen the worst parts of me, the darkest truths, and you have not flinched. Not once. And somewhere in these weeks I have developed feelings that terrify me. What kind of feelings, Caleb asked, though he thought he knew. The kind that make me want to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because there is nowhere else I want to be. The kind that make me imagine a future instead of just survival. The kind that make me think about what it would mean to truly be your wife instead of just a woman hiding behind that title. Caleb's hand found hers. I have those same feelings. Do you? Yes. And they terrify me too, because everyone I have ever loved has died, and the thought of loving you and losing you. Then we are both terrified together, Eleanor said. Is that not better than being terrified alone? Maybe. Caleb looked at their joined hands. Or maybe we are just setting ourselves up for more heartbreak. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. Then let us be foolish together. Let us take the risk, because I would rather have you for whatever time we get than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. They sat in silence, hands clasped, drawing comfort from proximity. Outside an owl called. Inside something fragile and precious was taking root between two damaged souls. I do not know how to do this, Caleb admitted. Build something real with someone who knows all my failures. Neither do I. Eleanor's thumb traced circles on the back of his hand, but I think we figure it out as we go, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Starting with tomorrow, Caleb said, when Wolf comes back. When he comes back, we face him together. Eleanor's grip tightened. Whatever happens. Whatever happens, Caleb agreed. That night, for the first time, Eleanor did not go back to the room she shared with Violet. She came to Caleb's door after midnight, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes bright with determination and fear in equal measure. I do not want to wait, she said quietly. I do not want to waste whatever time we might have left being careful and afraid. If tomorrow brings death, I want tonight to be about life. Caleb stood and crossed to her. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything. They came together with the desperation of people who had learned too well how quickly everything could be taken away, not gently, not carefully, but with hunger and need and the fierce determination to claim joy in the face of approaching darkness. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin to skin, hearts still racing. Eleanor's head rested on Caleb's chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns across his ribs. No regrets, she whispered. None, he agreed, and meant it. They slept that way, bodies intertwined, finding in physical intimacy what words had failed to express. In the next room, Violet heard the house settling into quiet and smiled. She pulled the ledger from its hiding place and hugged it to her chest. Tomorrow would bring trouble. But tonight, the two people who had saved her life had found something worth fighting for in each other. That was enough. The morning of the third day dawned clear and cold. Caleb woke with Eleanor still beside him, her hair spread across his pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. For a moment he just looked at her. This woman who had traveled so far, endured so much, and somehow ended up here, in his bed, in his life, in his heart. She woke slowly, her gray eyes finding his. Morning. Morning, he replied. Do you think he will come today? Yes. Are you afraid, terrified? But that does not change anything. No. Eleanor smiled slightly. It does not. They rose and dressed, made coffee, ate breakfast that none of them tasted, waited. The riders appeared just after noon, 4 of them this time, Wolf, a man wearing a sheriff's star, and 2 deputies. They rode directly to the house and dismounted without invitation. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Eleanor and Violet stayed inside watching through the window, Mr. Hartwolf said. I have my warrant. He pulled a folded document from his coat. Authorization to search these premises for 2 fugitives. Caleb did not take the paper. Under whose authority Judge Harmon in Helena, all legal and proper. The sheriff, a tired-looking man in his 50s, stepped forward. I do not like this any more than you do, Hart, but the law is the law. If those women are here, I have to take them back to face charges. And if they are not, Caleb asked, then we apologize for the inconvenience and move on. Caleb considered his options. He could fight, could refuse entry and force a confrontation. But that would only confirm guilt and put Eleanor and Violet at greater risk. Or he could call their bluff. Search if you must, he said. But those women are not here. Wolf pushed past him into the house. The sheriff and deputies followed, though they looked uncomfortable. Eleanor and Violet stood in the kitchen, their faces carefully neutral. "These them?" Wolf asked, pointing. Caleb moved to stand beside Eleanor. "This is my wife, Eleanor Hart, and this is her cousin Violet. They live here legally as part of my household," your wife, Wolf said flatly. "When were you married?" 3 weeks ago. Caleb lied smoothly. "Judge Harmon performed the ceremony. You can check his records." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Very convenient." "It is the truth," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I am Eleanor Hart, not Whitlock. I am this man's wife under Montana law. We will see about that." Wolf turned to the sheriff. "Search the premises. Look for any evidence that these are the fugitives we are seeking." The deputies moved through the house, opening trunks, checking rooms. One found Violet's trunk and began pulling out clothes. The other searched the small bedroom. They would find nothing, Caleb knew. All evidence of Eleanor and Violet's past had been carefully hidden or destroyed, except for the ledger. And that was, where was the ledger? Caleb's eyes found Violet. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Safe, that gesture said. Hidden where they will not find it. After 30 minutes of searching, the deputies returned empty-handed. Nothing, Sheriff, just personal effects. Nothing suspicious. Wolf was not satisfied. "I know it is them." "The descriptions match perfectly." "Descriptions can match a lot of people," the sheriff said. "Without proof, I cannot arrest them." He looked apologetic. "Sorry, Mr. Wolf, but we need more than suspicion." "Then get more," Wolf snapped. "Interview them separately. Check their stories. Something will not add up. We can do that." The sheriff turned to Eleanor. "Ma'am, would you mind answering some questions?" "Not at all," Eleanor said calmly. What followed was an interrogation designed to break her story. Questions about her past, her relationship with Caleb, how they met, why she came to Montana. Eleanor answered each one with steady composure, never contradicting herself, never showing fear. Violet was questioned next. She spoke less, but her story matched Eleanor's. Cousins from Philadelphia. Came west seeking new opportunities. Met Caleb through the matrimonial agency. Married. Settled. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Wolf, I am not seeing evidence of criminal activity here. Just a rancher and his family." "They are lying," Wolf insisted. "I know they are. Knowing and proving are different things." The sheriff folded his warrant. "Unless you have additional evidence, I cannot justify holding them." Wolf's face darkened with fury. "This is not over," he pointed at Eleanor. "I will prove who you are, and when I do you will hang for what you did." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "I look forward to seeing your proof, Mr. Wolf. Until then, I suggest you leave our property." The lawman departed, Wolf radiating frustration, the sheriff looking relieved to be done with it. Caleb watched them ride away, tension slowly draining from his shoulders. When they were out of sight, Violet retrieved the ledger from where she had hidden it, beneath the floorboards of the chicken coop wrapped in oilcloth. They never thought to look there. "Good thinking," Caleb said. "But Wolf is right. This is not over." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It is just beginning." Because somewhere Violet said quietly, "Thomas Whitlock is alive. And if Wolf found us, my father will too." Both Caleb and Eleanor turned to stare at her. "What did you say?" Eleanor whispered. Violet looked up, her young face suddenly ancient with knowledge. "I lied when I said I did not know if he survived. I knew. I have known since we left Pittsburgh. Thomas Whitlock is alive, Miss Eleanor. You did not kill him. And he is coming." The world seemed to stop. Eleanor swayed, and Caleb caught her. "How do you know?" he demanded. "Because before we left I went back to his room one last time, to make sure. And he was still breathing. Barely, but alive. I could have finished it. Should have finished it, but I was afraid. So I just took the ledger and ran." Tears streamed down Violet's face. "I am sorry. I should have told you. But I was afraid you would go back. Afraid you would try to kill him again and fail. So I kept it secret. And now he is hunting us." Eleanor finished, her voice hollow. "All this time, all these months, I thought I was running from my past, but I was just delaying the inevitable." The three of them stood in the kitchen, the weight of revelation crushing. Somewhere Thomas Whitlock was alive. Somewhere he was coming. And when he arrived, blood would be the only possible outcome. Caleb pulled Eleanor close. "How long?" he asked Violet. How long until he gets here? Based on when Wolf arrived, Violet's voice was barely audible. 3 days, maybe 4. He will not send more investigators. He will come himself, with hired guns, with men who are loyal only to money. 3 days, 72 hours, until everything they had built was tested by fire. Then we prepare, Caleb said. We fortify. We plan. And we make damn sure that when Thomas Whitlock arrives he finds more than 2 frightened women waiting. What will he find? Eleanor asked. He will find a family, Caleb said, ready to fight, ready to protect what is theirs, and if necessary, ready to finish what you started. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Inside, 3 broken people held each other and prepared for war. The reckoning was coming. 72 hours. 3 days to prepare for a man who had the resources to hire killers, the connections to manipulate law enforcement, and the cruelty to enjoy watching his property returned, broken and bleeding. Caleb stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the second day of preparation, watching the eastern horizon lighten from black to gray, and calculated their chances of survival. Not good, but not impossible either. Behind him, the house was alive with quiet activity. Eleanor checking food stores, counting ammunition, preparing the kinds of supplies people needed when they expected violence. Violet organizing medical materials, her hands steady, despite the terror Caleb could see in her eyes every time she thought no one was watching. They were preparing for siege, for battle, for the possibility that none of them would see another sunrise. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning stillness. Caleb's hand went to the rifle leaning against the porch rail. But the rider who emerged from the gloom was alone, and something about the way he sat, his horse struck a chord of recognition. The man pulled up 20 feet away and dismounted. He was perhaps 30, lean, and weathered with dark hair and eyes that held the kind of grief Caleb knew intimately. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the frozen ground, James Caleb said finally. Caleb. The younger man's voice was flat. Heard you might have trouble coming. How did you hear that sheriff stopped by my place after searching yours? Mentioned a Pinkerton asking questions. Mentioned you had taken a wife. Mentioned she looked scared. He paused. Figured if the great Caleb Hart finally remarried, must be something serious. The bitterness in those words was old and deep. James Morrison had been Sarah's younger brother, had blamed Caleb for her death, had sworn at her funeral that he would never speak to Caleb again, that the sight of him was a reminder of everything lost. And yet, here he stood. Why are you here? Caleb asked. James looked past him toward the house. Because no woman should be dragged back to a man who hurts her. I do not give a damn about you, Caleb, but if there is a woman in there who needs help, I will give it. Sarah would have wanted that. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. James was here. That was enough. There are 2 women, he said, and yes, they need help. Man coming is dangerous, wealthy, connected. He has hired guns and legal cover. How many guns do not know? At least 6, probably 8, plus the man himself. Against the 3 of us, James said. 4. Eleanor can shoot. James's eyebrows rose. Your mail-order bride is armed. She is more than that, much more. Caleb gestured toward the house. Come inside, we have planning to do. The kitchen felt crowded with 4 people in it. Eleanor poured coffee while Violet set out bread and dried meat. James sat at the table and studied the women with frank curiosity. This is my wife, Eleanor, Caleb said. And this is Violet. They are running from a man named Thomas Whitlock. He is coming here to take them back. We are going to stop him. James looked at Eleanor. What did you do to him? Stabbed him 7 times, Eleanor said without hesitation, while he slept. Because he kept me prisoner for 5 years and planned to sell Violet into prostitution. James blinked, then nodded slowly. Sounds like he had it coming. He did, Violet said quietly. But he survived, and now he is bringing men to kill us. Not just to kill you, James corrected. To kill anyone protecting you. He looked at Caleb. You understand what you are risking? I understand. Caleb's voice was steady. I am doing it anyway. Why? Because they are mine to protect. Because I have buried too many people I failed to save. Because I am tired of being afraid of living. He paused. Take your pick. James studied him for a long moment. Then his mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. Sarah always said you were stubborn. Guess she was right. The mention of Sarah hung in the air. Caleb waited for the familiar stab of guilt. It came, but softer now, muted by time and the presence of Eleanor beside him. "I am sorry," he said to James. "For what happened to her? I know I failed her." "Yes, you did." James's voice was hard. "But I have had 3 years to think about it, and I have come to realize that blaming you was easier than accepting that sometimes people just die, that sometimes there is no one to blame except God and bad luck." He picked up his coffee cup, stared into it. "She loved you, you know, even at the end, even in pain. She kept asking for you, kept saying your name." Caleb's throat tightened. "I know. So maybe I have been wrong. Maybe keeping this anger was just another way of keeping her alive in my mind. But she is gone, and you are here, and these women need help." He looked at Eleanor. "So I am helping. Not for you, Caleb, for them." "That is all I ask," Caleb said. They spent the next hour planning. The ranch had natural defenses, hills on 3 sides, open ground to the south. Anyone approaching would be visible from a distance. The house had thick timber walls and small windows. The barn offered height and clear sight lines. If they positioned themselves correctly, they could create a crossfire that would make any assault costly. But the real defense was not tactical. It was leverage. "Show me this ledger," James said. Violet retrieved it and placed it on the table. James opened it and began reading. His expression darkened with each page. "This is evidence of dozens of felonies," he said. "Trafficking, bribery, conspiracy. If this became public, everyone in Whitlock's pocket goes down with him." Eleanor finished. "That is our insurance. If he tries to take us by force, we threaten to publish it." "And if he does not care," James asked, "if he is willing to risk exposure to get you back?" "Then we have a problem," Caleb admitted. Violet spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "He will care. His reputation is everything to him. Being exposed as a criminal would be worse than death, worse than losing us. He will negotiate rather than risk that." "You sound certain," James observed. "I am his daughter." Violet met his eyes. "I know him better than anyone. He will come with force to intimidate. But he will be willing to deal if the alternative is destruction." James looked at her with new interest. "How old are you? 17? You are very brave for 17. Violet's cheeks colored. "I am very tired of being afraid. That is not the same as brave." "Sometimes it is exactly the same," James said gently. Something passed between them. A moment of recognition, 2 wounded people seeing each other clearly. Eleanor noticed. Her hand found Caleb's under the table, squeezed gently. Life finding life, even in darkness. They fortified through the day, moved ammunition to strategic locations, filled water barrels in case of fire, discussed fallback positions and escape routes. James proved himself capable and calm, his years of military service evident in the way he thought tactically. As evening approached, Caleb found Eleanor on the porch staring toward the southern horizon. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Beautiful," she said without looking at him. "Yes." "Do you think we will see another sunset?" Caleb moved to stand beside her. "I think we will see many more. I think Whitlock is dangerous, but not stupid. He will negotiate, and if he does not, then we fight, and we win, because we have more to lose than he does." Eleanor leaned against him. "I am afraid, Caleb, not of dying. Of you dying because of me, of Violet suffering because I tried to save her. Of all this being for nothing." "It will not be for nothing," Caleb said firmly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you are free. You understand that you are not his property anymore. You are your own person, my wife by choice. That matters, does it?" "If he drags me back, he will not." Caleb turned her to face him. "I swear to you, Eleanor, on my life, on Sarah's memory, on everything I have ever valued, he will not take you." She kissed him then, not gently, not carefully, but with desperation and need and the hunger of people who knew time was running out. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "If we survive this," she whispered, "I want to build something real with you. A marriage, a life, maybe even—" She stopped, bit her lip. "Even what?" Caleb prompted. "Even a family. If you would want that, if you could bear the risk." Caleb pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I would want that more than anything." They stood together as darkness fell, holding each other against the cold and the fear and the uncertain future. Inside, James and Violet were cleaning rifles. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, and somewhere to the south, Thomas Whitlock was riding toward his reckoning. The riders appeared at noon the next day. Caleb counted them from the barn loft, 8 men including Whitlock. Professional gunmen by the look of them, hard-faced and well-armed. They rode in formation, disciplined and dangerous. Thomas Whitlock was easy to identify. He rode at the center, a man of perhaps 55 with silver hair and expensive clothes. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the careful way he moved, healing from injuries. 7 stab wounds took time to recover from. The riders stopped 200 yards from the house. Whitlock dismounted with obvious pain. One of his men helped him, and Whitlock shrugged off the assistance irritably. Caleb Hart Whitlock called his voice, carrying clearly across the snow. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Caleb stepped out of the barn, rifle in hand. "Nothing here belongs to you, Whitlock. I disagree. My wife and my daughter are on your property. I have come to take them home. Your wife is dead. Your daughter never existed. You have no claim on anyone here." Whitlock smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mr. Hart. The easy way, you hand them over, and I leave you in peace. The hard way, my men burn you out, and I take them anyway. Your choice." "There is a third option," Eleanor called. She stepped out of the house, Violet beside her. Both women were armed. Both stood straight and unafraid, despite the terror Caleb knew they felt. Whitlock's eyes locked on Eleanor. His smile widened. "There you are, my dear. I have been looking everywhere for you. I am not your dear," Eleanor said coldly. "I am not your wife. I am Eleanor Hart, and I am never going back with you. You do not have a choice." "Yes, I do." "Violet, show him." Violet held up the ledger. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. "We have your records, Father. Every crime, every bribe, every girl you bought and sold, every man you own. All of it documented in your own handwriting." Whitlock went very still. "Where did you get that? From your desk. The night we left. While you were bleeding on your bedroom floor, you little thief." "No," Violet said. "I am your victim. But I am also your destroyer. Because if you try to take us, if you hurt anyone here, copies of this ledger go to every newspaper between Montana and Washington. Your name will be ruined. Your associates will turn on you. You will be destroyed." Whitlock's face darkened with rage. "You are bluffing." "Try me," Violet said. "Test me. See what happens." For a long moment, silence stretched across the snow. Whitlock's hired guns shifted nervously. They had been paid to intimidate, maybe to kill. But going against a man who had documentary evidence of political corruption, that was a different kind of danger. James stepped out of the house, rifle trained on Whitlock. "She is not bluffing," he called. "And even if she were, you would have to go through all of us to find out. How many of your men are willing to die for your pride?" One of the hired guns nudged his horse back slightly. Then another. They were professionals. They recognized a losing situation. Whitlock saw it happening, saw his leverage disappearing. His hand dropped toward the pistol at his hip. "Do not," Caleb warned. "I will not be threatened by my own property," Whitlock snarled. "You are mine, Eleanor. You will always be mine. And I will see you dead before I let another man have you." His gun cleared leather. 3 things happened simultaneously. Caleb raised his rifle. James did the same. And Violet, moving faster than anyone expected, fired the pistol she had been holding at her side. The shot echoed across the ranch. Whitlock staggered, looking down at the blood spreading across his chest. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. "You!" he gasped, staring at Violet. "You shot me." "Yes," Violet said. Her voice was steady now. "No more fear, just cold certainty. You hurt my mother. You hurt Miss Eleanor. You hurt dozens of girls. You were going to hurt me. So yes, I shot you, and I am not sorry." Whitlock's legs gave out. He collapsed into the snow red spreading around him. His hired guns made no move to help. They were already backing their horses away, unwilling to die for a man who could not pay them if he was dead. The sheriff, Whitlock wheezed, "I will have you hanged." "The sheriff will read this ledger," Eleanor said, moving closer but staying out of reach. "He will see your crimes, and he will rule this self-defense, which it is." Whitlock coughed. Blood flecked his lips. "This is not over." "Yes," Violet said quietly. "It is." She knelt beside him, close enough that Caleb tensed, ready to intervene. But Violet did not shoot again. She just looked into her father's eyes. "I wanted you to love me," she said, "even after everything, even knowing what you were. Some part of me hoped you would choose me over your greed, but you never did, you never could. So this is goodbye, Father. I hope wherever you go, you understand what you lost." Whitlock tried to speak, failed. His eyes went distant, unfocused, then still. Violet stood and walked back to Eleanor. She handed her the pistol. "It is done," she said simply. Eleanor pulled her into an embrace. Both women were crying now. Relief and grief and the complicated emotions that came with ending a nightmare through violence. The hired guns were already riding away, wanting no part of what came next. James lowered his rifle and came to stand beside Caleb. "Well," he said, "that was not how I expected that to end, nor did I," Caleb admitted. "But maybe it is better this way. Clean. Final." "Is it ever clean?" James asked. "No, but it is done. That has to count for something." They buried Thomas Whitlock far from the house in unmarked ground. No words, no ceremony, just earth and snow and the weight of justice, however rough. The weeks that followed Whitlock's death brought a strange kind of peace to the Hart Ranch. The legal proceedings dragged on, but the outcome was never in doubt. Self-defense, justice served. The ledger's revelations rippled outward, destroying corrupt men across 3 states. Through it all, Eleanor and Caleb grew closer. The desperate intimacy they had found the night before Whitlock arrived became a pattern. They were no longer 2 damaged people sharing space. They were husband and wife in truth, building something real from the ashes of their separate traumas. 6 weeks after Whitlock's death, as early spring softened into true warmth, Eleanor began to notice changes. Missed courses, morning nausea, a tenderness in her breasts. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx the fragile happiness they had found. But when 8 weeks had passed and the signs were unmistakable, she knew she could not hide it any longer. The sheriff came 2 days later, summoned by James. He read the ledger, interviewed all 4 of them, examined Whitlock's body and the scene. His conclusion was swift and pragmatic. Self-defense, he said. Man came here with hired killers to abduct women by force. Those women defended themselves. Clear case. He looked at Violet. "You did what you had to do, girl. No court in Montana would convict you for it." "What about the ledger?" Eleanor asked. "That the sheriff said is evidence in about 40 different criminal cases. I will need to keep it. But copies will go to the appropriate authorities." He paused. "You have done the territory a service, miss. A lot of powerful people are going to fall because of what you documented," good Violet said. The legal proceedings took weeks. Statements were given. Records were examined. One by one, the men named in Whitlock's ledger were arrested. Judges, politicians, police captains. The scandal reached all the way to the Pennsylvania State House. Newspapers called it the greatest corruption case in decades. Through it all, Eleanor and Violet remained at the ranch. Safe, protected, free. Spring came slowly to Montana that year. Snow melted grudgingly. The earth softened. Green shoots pushed through hard ground, defiant and alive. Caleb and Eleanor were legally married in Helena with James and Violet as witnesses. A small ceremony, no grand celebration, just 4 people who had survived darkness together, choosing to build something in the light. On the ride back to the ranch, Eleanor was quiet. They had been legally married for 3 weeks now, and in that time, her body had begun whispering secrets she could no longer ignore. Caleb noticed her silence, but gave her space, knowing she would speak when ready. Finally, as the ranch came into view, she said, "There is something I need to tell you, something I have known for a few weeks now but was afraid to say during all the chaos." Caleb's chest tightened. "All right. I am pregnant. 2 months, I think. It must have happened that night before Whitlock came, when we chose life over fear." The words hung in the air. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to stare at her. "Are you certain?" "Very certain. 2 months, I think. Maybe more." She would not meet his eyes. "I know you are afraid. After Sarah. After losing so many. But I—" "Eleanor." Caleb took her face in his hands, made her look at him. "I am terrified. I will not lie about that. But I am also—" He searched for words. "I am grateful and hopeful and determined to do everything in my power to keep you and this child safe." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You are not angry." "Angry." He laughed, shaky and overwhelmed. "I am the opposite of angry. I am—" He could not finish, just pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. Beside them, Violet smiled. James, riding alongside the wagon, reached over and squeezed her hand. Life somehow was beginning again. The pregnancy progressed through summer and into fall. Eleanor remained strong, working alongside Caleb in modified ways. The ranch thrived. Neighboring ranchers, having heard of their stand against Whitlock, treated them with new respect. Caleb Hart and his wife were not people to be crossed. Violet and James became inseparable, not lovers, not yet, both too wounded for easy intimacy, but partners, friends, two people learning to trust again in the company of someone who understood damage. On a warm September evening, as Eleanor's belly grew round and obvious, the four of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. "What will you name the baby?" Violet asked. "If it is a girl," Eleanor said, "Sarah Margaret, for Caleb's first wife and the midwife who helped us." "And if it is a boy?" James asked. "We have not decided," Caleb admitted. "Suggestions," Heinrich Eleanor said quietly. "For my father, the good man who died too soon." Caleb nodded. "Heinrich Hart. I like it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Inside, a fire burned against the autumn chill. Outside, stars emerged, and in Eleanor's womb, new life grew. The labor began on a November morning, 3 days before the baby was due. Eleanor woke Caleb with a gentle touch. "It is time," she said. Fear crashed over him. Not again. Not like Sarah, not like the twins, not after everything they had survived. Eleanor saw the panic in his face. She took his hand, placed it on her belly. "Feel that the baby is moving. Strong. Healthy. This is going to be different. How can you know? I cannot know. But I choose to believe it. And I need you to believe it too." Caleb forced himself to breathe, to focus, to be present instead of trapped in the past. They sent James for the midwife. Margaret arrived within the hour, calm and capable. She examined Eleanor and pronounced everything normal. "First babies take their time," she said. "Could be hours yet. Everyone settle in." But hours became a day, then a night. Eleanor labored through darkness and into the next dawn, exhausting herself with each contraction. Caleb stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her face, murmuring encouragement, even as his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. By the second morning, Eleanor was fading. Her face was pale, her breathing labored. Margaret's expression had grown concerned. "The baby is big," she said quietly to Caleb, and positioned awkwardly. "This is going to be difficult." Caleb felt the past rising up to swallow him. Sarah had labored for 2 days. Sarah had bled out. Sarah had died in his arms. "No," he whispered. "Not again." Violet appeared at his side. "Mr. Hart," her voice was firm, "you need to breathe. You need to be strong for her. She needs you present, not lost in the past." "I cannot lose her," Caleb said. "I cannot survive it again." "Then do not let her see that fear." Violet squeezed his arm hard. "She is fighting for her life and your child's life. The least you can do is fight your demons, now." The words cut through his panic. Caleb looked at Eleanor, saw her watching him with exhausted eyes, saw her needing him to be strong. He moved to her side, took her hand. "You can do this," he said. "You are the strongest person I know." "I am so tired," she gasped. "I know, but you are almost there. Margaret says the baby is crowning, just a little more." Eleanor gathered herself, drew on reserves Caleb did not know she possessed, and pushed. The baby emerged in a rush of blood and fluid, and Margaret's triumphant cry. A wail filled the room, strong and angry and alive. "You have a son," Margaret said, placing the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest, "perfect and healthy and mad as hell about being born." Eleanor cradled the baby with shaking arms, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "He is here. He is really here." Caleb stared at his son. Dark hair, tiny fists waving, eyes squeezed shut against the brightness. He was perfect. Completely, impossibly perfect. And Eleanor was alive, pale and exhausted, but breathing, smiling, whole. "We made it," Eleanor whispered. All of us made it. Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. Thank you for being strong enough, for surviving, for giving me this, for giving us this, Eleanor corrected. We did this together. Margaret worked to deliver the afterbirth and ensure Eleanor was not bleeding excessively. Everything proceeded normally, no complications, no crisis. Just a healthy baby and an exhausted mother and a father who could barely process that his family had survived. Heinrich, Eleanor said, looking at their son, Heinrich Hart. Welcome to the world, little one. The baby's cries softened. He seemed to sense his mother's voice turning toward the sound. Caleb reached out a tentative finger, and tiny fingers wrapped around it with surprising strength. He has your grip, Eleanor observed. He has your stubbornness, Caleb replied. They sat together in the quiet morning, a family born from loss and pain, and the stubborn refusal to surrender to darkness. Outside, Violet and James waited on the porch. When Margaret emerged and gave them the news, both wept with relief. Life, it seemed, could triumph after all. 1 year later, spring had returned to the Hart Ranch. The house had been expanded, an additional room for Heinrich, who was walking now and getting into everything. The barn had new stalls for the growing herd of horses. The garden was larger, more productive. And in the small cemetery behind the house, there were still 4 graves from Caleb's past. But they were tended now, flowers planted, stones cleaned, honored rather than mourned. Beside them was a 5th grave. Thomas Whitlock's unmarked but present, a reminder of what had been overcome. But the focus was not on death anymore. It was on the family gathered for the evening meal. Caleb and Eleanor married now for 18 months. Violet and James engaged to be married in the fall, and Heinrich laughing as Violet made faces at him. This is what we built, Eleanor said quietly to Caleb as they watched. Out of ashes and fear and the courage to try again. This is what you built, Caleb corrected. You saved me as much as I saved you. No, she leaned against him. We saved each other. That is what love does. They sat together as the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting everything gold. Inside the house, laughter. Outside, peace. And between them, the quiet certainty that they had found something worth every risk. The past could not be erased. The graves remained, the scars endured, but the future stretched ahead full of possibility and hope, and the promise that sometimes, against all odds, broken people could build something beautiful. Eleanor's voice, soft in the gathering darkness. Do you ever regret it? Taking a chance on a stranger, Caleb pulled her closer. Every day, I am grateful I was fool enough to hope. The mountains stood eternal. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. And in the small house on the Montana frontier, a family built from tragedy and courage settled in for another night. Safe. Together. Home. The end.